What if the religious institutions that, you see on almost every street corner? I mean, the
Right.
buildings, the stages, the weekly routines.
Right. The whole setup.
Yeah, exactly. What if all of that is actually a massive structural failure of an ancient
It
design?
is a wild thought.
It really is. Like,
Yeah.
imagine you hire an architectural firm to build you this cozy, highly functional family home, and you hand them the exact blueprint.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right, so you come back 6 months later, and instead of a house, you are standing in the middle of this cavernous concrete commercial warehouse.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You're looking around at, I don't know, thousands of plastic seats all facing a stage, and you're asking the foreman, what on earth is this? Like, where is the dining room? Where is the family space?
Right, because you'd recognize instantly that a complete deviation from the original design had occurred.
Exactly.
I mean, the structure might be impressive, sure, it might even hold a lot of people,
Yeah.
but it completely fails to serve the function that it was actually drawn up for.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And for those of you listening right now, especially if you're the kind of learner who just loves pulling back the curtain on the hidden mechanics of everyday concepts, we are going on a really serious exploration today.
We really are.
Yeah. We're unpacking a text that claims this exact bait and switch actually happened to the largest religious movement on earth. The text we're looking at is called the Ekklesia Blueprint, Restoring the Biblical Body of Christ, and it's by an author named Ratzai.
And it is a provocative read, to say the very least.
Oh, highly provocative. So let's just set some ground rules right up front before we get too deep.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Right? So we are diving into some really explosive claims regarding global religious institutions today. But our mission on this deep dive is never to endorse a specific theology.
Absolutely not.
We are definitely not taking sides or telling you what to believe. Our job here is just to act as your guides through the source material, and we want to impartially examine the historical arguments, the linguistic deep dives, and the structural critiques that the author presents.
And, the core premise we are examining here is undeniably bold.
Yeah, lay it out for us.
So the author argues that the modern church structure, which, let's be honest, most of society understands as a 60-minute Sunday service inside a specific building, led by a professional speaker, that structure is completely alien to the original biblical design.
Completely alien.
Right. According to this text, there is this irreconcilable conflict between what the author calls the religious institution of man and the uncompromised kingdom of God.
It's just the kind of premise that forces you to look at something that's culturally ubiquitous and wonder, wait, how did we actually get here?
Exactly.
But to understand the author's argument about how far the modern concept has actually drifted, we really have to start at the bedrock.
Which is the language.
Yes. The text argues that the translation of original ancient words literally changes everything. And it all starts with a word that most people think they understand, but apparently they really don't.
That's right. So the text takes us straight into ancient Greek linguistics.
Okay, let's get into it.
Specifically, it zeroes in on the word Jesus is recorded using in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 18.
The famous one.
Right. In modern English translations, Jesus says, "I will build my church." But the author points out that the English word church carries centuries of medieval European baggage.
So much baggage.
Yeah. The original Greek word used in the text is actually ekklesia.
Right, and I think the assumption most of us have is that whatever the original word was, it probably just meant, a holy building or maybe a gathering of people singing hymns.
Sure, that's what we've been taught.
But the text argues that interpretation is entirely backward.
Completely backward. The blueprint actually breaks down the etymology for us. So ekklesia is a compound word. It's formed from ek, which means out of, and kaleo, which means to call.
Okay, so out of and to call.
Yeah, so put together, it translates literally to the called out ones.
Right.
But the literal translation isn't even where the big surprise is. The shock actually comes from the historical and cultural context of the word itself.
How so?
Well, in ancient Greece and the broader Roman Empire, an ecclesia was not a religious term at all.
Wait, really?
Nope. It had literally nothing to do with temples or priests or altars or any religious rituals.
Wait, so it wasn't a religious word at all? Then why on earth use it to describe a religious movement?
Because according to the author, it wasn't meant to be just a religious movement.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Ecclesia was actually a secular, political, and governmental term.
A governmental term.
Exactly. In a Greek city-state, like ancient Athens, for example, the ecclesia was the summoned assembly of citizens who were called out to govern and make laws.
So paint a picture of that for us. Like, what did an actual ancient ecclesia look like in practice?
Okay, imagine you were a citizen of a city-state. When some kind of crisis arose or a major decision needed to be made, like, I don't know, going to war, signing a treaty, or electing magistrates, the town crier would actually go through the streets,
Okay.
and he would call the citizens out of their private homes and
You
businesses.
called out ones.
Exactly. They would assemble in the public square.
Yeah.
And this gathered body of citizens, that was the ecclesia.
Wow.
Their job was to debate, make legislative decisions, and essentially handle the business of the government. They were executing authority over their region.
That is a massive linguistic pivot.
It really is.
So if we follow the author's logic here, saying, I will build my ecclesia, well, it's less like buying a ticket to a weekly motivational TED Talk.
Right.
And it's much more like being drafted into a spiritual city council or like a parliament.
Precisely. The text argues that Jesus was intentionally using a civic governmental term.
That changes the whole vibe.
It does. He was establishing a called-out assembly of kingdom citizens who were sent to spiritually govern and execute heaven's authority on earth.
Wow.
And the text asserts that this just completely changes the functional identity of the group. Like, they aren't an audience gathered to listen.
Right.
They are an active assembly gathered to govern.
And the text connects this governmental identity to the biblical concept of the body of Christ, right? Like it brings up passages in 1 Corinthians 12 and Ephesians 1.
Yes, and this is where the biological metaphor sort of meets the governmental one.
Like that down for us.
Well, if the ecclesia is a governing assembly, then the body of Christ logically cannot be an event you just attend on the weekend.
Because a body is alive.
Exactly. A body is a living organic entity. Ephesians 1 actually describes this body as the fullness of him who fills everything in every way.
Right.
So the author's point is that an ecclesia is an active, working organism designed to operate 24/7 in the world. It's not a static venue or, a highly produced show.
Okay, I see the macro level structure the author is building here, this whole idea of a living, governing body.
Yeah.
But, a parliament or a city council can still be pretty cold and bureaucratic.
Oh, absolutely.
So what happens on the micro level? Like when these called out ones actually interact with each other in a room, what is the blueprint dictating for their actual relationships?
Well, that question leads us directly to the second massive linguistic redefinition in the text.
And what's that?
It's centered around the Greek word koinonia.
Ah, koinonia.
Yeah. This is the word used in the book of Acts, specifically chapter 2, verses 42 through 47, to describe the culture of the original first-century community.
Let me guess, is this another word we've completely watered down over the centuries?
You guessed it.
Because in English, that's usually just translated as fellowship, right?
Right.
Which, let's be honest, in modern institutional terms, usually just means standing in a crowded lobby holding a lukewarm cup of coffee.
Yeah, exactly.
You ask someone about their weekend for 2 minutes, and then you both just rush out to your cars.
That is exactly the modern experience. But the source text argues that translating koinonia as merely fellowship completely strips it of its terrifying intensity.
Terrifying intensity, that is quite a phrase.
Well, in classical Greek, koinonia implies joint ownership, intimate shared life, covenant partnership.
Wow.
It's a level of mutual communion that just completely obliterates modern individualism.
Okay, joint ownership. Seriously. I actually want to push back on that a bit because practically speaking, whenever a group of people tries joint ownership today, it usually turns into like a utopian commune.
Right, which usually ends badly.
Yeah, it collapses in 3 months because human nature takes over. People get lazy, resentment builds up, someone takes advantage of the system. So how does the text claim they actually pulled this off?
It's a completely valid skepticism, and honestly, the author actually leans into the extreme nature of this.
Okay, how so?
The text points directly to the historical accounts in Acts 2 and Acts 4. It wasn't just a theoretical, philosophical intimacy. It was radical, disruptive economics.
Disruptive economics.
Yeah. The historical record states that these early believers were voluntarily selling their real estate, their land, and their private possessions.
Just selling it all.
Selling it and creating a centralized pool of resources to distribute to anyone who had a need.
Yeah, the text highlights a very specific line from Acts 4. It says, "No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. There were no needy persons among them." That's intense.
It is. And you have to think about the socioeconomic reality of the Roman Empire at that time.
Right, set the scene for us.
Well, you had a massive wealth gap. You had The extreme elite on one side, and then you had this massive population of slaves, day laborers, and just destitute people on the other.
A huge divide.
Exactly. The Roman economy ran on a strict patronage system. So the wealthy patron would dole out favors to the poor clients, but it was in exchange for absolute loyalty and social submission.
So it was all about leverage.
Yes, a system totally built on leverage and inequality.
And into that brutal hierarchy, this ecclesia just introduces koinonia.
Exactly. They introduced this economic subculture where the wealthy landowner and the former slave were suddenly operating in total covenant partnership.
That must have been shocking to the Romans.
Oh, completely. They were sharing their homes, their bread, their finances, and their physical burdens so deeply that poverty was literally eradicated within their micro-society.
That is just staggering when you compare it to the modern baseline.
It really is.
I mean, the text actively contrasts this original blueprint of economic and social entanglement with the modern standard, which is, sitting in a row, shaking a stranger's hand for 5 seconds during the greet your neighbor portion of a service.
Right.
And then you sit back down and never actually know if the person sitting next to you is facing eviction that week. It's a jarring comparison.
It's so jarring. The author is basically arguing that if you strip away koinonia-like, if you remove the economic vulnerability and the daily shared life, you no longer have the biblical ecclesia.
You just have a club.
Exactly. You just have a religious club.
Okay, so we have this picture of a radical, called-out governing body practicing a level of shared life that honestly defies human nature. But how did they maintain that? Like, if they were living in the middle of the Roman Empire, surrounded by paganism, greed, and brutal politics, what kept them from just slowly assimilating into the broader culture?
Well, that tension brings us to the second major pillar of the blueprint, which is the absolute non-negotiable clash of cultures.
Oh, okay.
The source text insists that this community must remain distinct. In fact, it argues that adapting to worldly standards is not just a mistake. The biblical authors describe it as spiritual adultery.
I really want to dig into this because this concept flies in the face of almost all modern institutional logic.
Oh, totally.
Like if you read church growth books today or look at how large institutions operate, the prevailing logic is always you have to adapt to the culture to reach the culture.
Right, make it relevant.
Yeah, exactly. You need to look like them, talk like them, use their marketing tactics, and make your message palatable so you don't scare people away. You blend in to be a good influence. But this text is arguing the exact opposite.
It vehemently rejects that assimilation strategy.
Vehement.
Yeah, and the author anchors this rejection deep in the original languages again, starting all the way back in the Old Testament with the Hebrew word kadosh.
Which we see in the book of Leviticus, correct?
Yes, specifically in passages like Leviticus 20, verse 26, and chapter 18, verse 3.
Okay.
Now, the word kadosh is universally translated as holy. But the text explains that kadosh does not merely mean moral purity or just being a good person.
Which is how everyone uses it today.
Right. But the literal root of the word actually means to be cut off, to be set apart, to be distinct, non-conformed, and completely unique.
So holiness in this blueprint is structural.
Yeah.
It's about being culturally alien. It's God telling the Israelites, I am cutting you off from the methods and traditions of the surrounding nations. You cannot operate the way they operate.
Precisely. And the author traces that exact same mandate directly into the New Testament using a really fascinating Greek word, sigmatizo.
Okay, sigmatizo. Let's break that one down. Where do we find it and what does it actually mean?
We find it in Romans 12, verse 2. It's in the famous verse where the Apostle Paul writes, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world."
Okay, I know that one.
Right, so the word Paul uses for conform is sigmatizo. The text unpacks the imagery behind this word, and it literally means to press into a mold.
To press into a mold.
Yeah, to shape something according to a surrounding pattern or to adopt the external posture and fashion of the current age.
I love that visual. Like, think of a Play-Doh mold.
Yes, exactly.
The culture around you is a very specific shape. Maybe it's a star, maybe it's a triangle, whatever. And the society you live in is constantly applying this immense pressure, trying to squeeze you into that exact shape so you fit neatly into the system.
That's the perfect analogy.
Right, and Paul is saying, do not let the world squeeze you into its mold. For you listening right now, just think about your own life.
It's so applicable.
It is. Think about your workplace, your neighborhood, your social media feeds. What are the molds that are silently pressing against you right now?
Oh, they're everywhere.
The pressure to buy the right car, to have the right political opinions, to spend your money on the exact same entertainment as everyone else. The text is arguing that the ecclesia was designed to be totally resistant to that pressure.
Totally resistant. And the theological stakes of resisting that pressure, according to the blueprint, could not be higher.
How high are we talking?
Well, the text references James chapter 4, verse 4, which uses incredibly stark language. It says, friendship with the world means enmity against God.
Enmity. That's a strong word.
Very strong. It also cites 1 John 2, verses 15 through 17, warning that if anyone loves the systems of the world, the love of the Father is not in them.
The author also brings in Jesus' own testimony during his trial before Pontius Pilate, right, in John 18.
Yes.
Pilate is trying to understand if Jesus is a political threat to Rome, and Jesus tells him explicitly, my kingdom is not of this world.
Exactly.
And the author uses this to build this ironclad case. The ecclesia was never meant to mirror, adopt, or Christianize the culture it resides in.
It's meant to be an entirely alternative civilization.
Right.
But, what makes this source text so compelling is that it refuses to just leave this as an abstract philosophical debate about holiness.
It gets practical.
Very practical. The author actually provides a literal point-by-point matrix of how this kingdom standard violently clashes with earthly systems in everyday life.
Let's explore that matrix, because this is where the rubber meets the road.
Definitely.
The author frames this section around a line from the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6, verse 10. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Right.
And the text argues this isn't just a passive poetic wish. It's a militant mandate for the culture of heaven to actively replace the systems of this world wherever the ecclesia exists.
Exactly. It's a colonizing mandate, not by force or violence, obviously, but by establishing an alternative culture right in the middle of the corrupt one.
So let's walk through the text's specific contrasting standards, starting with perhaps the most difficult one for modern readers, money and the economy.
Oh, this one is tough. The text contrasts the worldly standard of finance with the kingdom standard. So the worldly system is based on ownership, hoarding, greed, the accumulation of wealth, charging interest.
Basically everything we consider normal.
Right, and putting your ultimate trust in financial institutions and retirement accounts.
But the kingdom standard, according to the author, demands a complete overhaul of that mindset.
Total overhaul.
It's defined by stewardship rather than ownership. It requires 100% surrender of assets, radical sharing, prioritizing giving to the poor, and trusting entirely in divine provision rather than Wall Street.
So it's a massive shift from a scarcity mindset, where I have to protect what is mine, to an abundance mindset rooted in God's economy.
Right. And then the next one on the matrix is power and leadership. And this is fascinating because human history is essentially just a long record of people trying to get power over other people.
Yeah, that's pretty much the whole story. The worldly system is defined by dominating others, bossing people around, pulling rank, seeking titles, and craving fame and recognition.
Standard corporate ladder stuff.
Exactly. But the kingdom standard outlined in the text completely inverts the social pyramid.
It points directly to Jesus washing his disciples' feet. And we really need to understand what a shock that was back then.
It was scandalous.
In a first-century honor and shame culture, the master does not wash the dirt off the feet of his subordinates. That was literally the job of the lowest slave in the household.
And by doing that, Jesus was setting the permanent blueprint for kingdom power, which is serving others, intentionally taking the lowest position, rejecting honorific titles, and just dying to self-interest.
Wow.
To lead in this blueprint is to become the servant of everyone.
Then the matrix moves to culture and lifestyle. The text calls out the worldly chase for self-gratification, blindly following popular trends, the obsession with physical appearance.
And the modern chase for social media clout, too.
Right, all of that. And it contrasts that with the kingdom mandate of living a holy life, mortifying the desires of the flesh, and prioritizing unseen righteousness over public popularity.
Which naturally leads right into how this kind of community handles trouble and conflict.
Right, because if you are living this radically, you are going to encounter friction.
Guaranteed.
So the world standard for conflict resolution is simple. Seek revenge, sue people who wrong you, hold on to hatred, gossip to ruin reputations, and operate on an eye for an eye basis. Defend your rights at all costs.
But the kingdom standard demands the impossible.
It really does.
It demands total forgiveness, actively blessing your enemies, praying for those who are actively persecuting you, turning the other cheek and walking in unconditional love, even when you're being wronged.
And finally, the Matrix looks at goals and success. Like, what is the point of it all?
Right, the end game.
The worldly dream is accumulating earthly wealth, achieving fame, maximizing personal comfort, and eventually reaching a life of retired ease where you just don't have to work anymore.
But the blueprint says the kingdom goal is entirely different.
Hmm.
Success is measured by winning souls, building up treasure in heaven rather than on earth, taking up your cross daily, and actually suffering for the sake of the gospel.
I want to introduce an analogy here that the text relies on, which I think perfectly encapsulates this entire matrix we just walked through.
Yeah, it's a really good one.
It references 2 Corinthians 5, verse 20, which calls believers ambassadors. If you think about the legal reality of an ambassador, it's a profound concept.
It really is.
Think about an ambassador from, say, France, who is living in a foreign country. They breathe the foreign air, they walk the foreign streets, but they do not operate under the laws of the host nation.
Not at all.
They operate strictly under the laws, the economy, and the culture of France.
That's a brilliant summary of the author's argument. An ambassador has diplomatic immunity. They are physically present, but legally and culturally, they're completely alien.
Right.
They represent a different king and a different constitution entirely.
And what happens if an ambassador starts acting exactly like the citizens of the host nation? Like, what if they start paying taxes to the foreign king, ignoring their homeland's laws and just totally assimilating?
Well, they get recalled.
Exactly.
They are no longer representing their homeland. They have compromised their mission completely. And this is where the author drops a very stark warning.
Yeah, talk about that warning.
The text emphasizes Matthew chapter 5, where Jesus calls his followers the salt of the earth and the light of the world.
Okay.
Think about salt. Salt only preserves meat if it maintains its distinct chemical composition. If it loses its saltiness, it's completely useless.
Right.
So the author argues that if a modern believer's lifestyle, their spending habits, their entertainment choices, their conflict resolution, their ambitions, if all of that is 100% identical to their unsaved neighbor, they are not an ambassador.
Wow.
They are operating in, quote, dangerous deception.
Okay, so let's synthesize where we are right now. We have this blueprint. It calls for a highly participatory, economically entangled, radically anti-cultural governing body of believers who live like foreign ambassadors.
That's the baseline.
Right. They share everything, they care for the sick, they refuse to assimilate. That is the original design.
Yep.
But if we look around today, the vast majority of religious experience consists of sitting quietly in rows of pews facing a wooden stage while one person speaks.
Yeah, quite the contrast.
How on earth did we get from point A to point B?
Well, this brings us to the pivot point of the entire document, a section we can call the historical hijack.
The hijack.
Yes. The author argues that the modern pulpit and pew system is not just a natural evolution of the biblical blueprint. It is actually a structure stolen directly from pagan Roman culture.
We need to slow down and really dig into this history.
Let's do it.
Walk us through the timeline. How did this hijack happen?
The text points to the year AD 312 as the catastrophic turning point for the Ekklesia.
We do 320.
Yes. This is the year the Roman Emperor Constantine reportedly converted to Christianity. And then, in AD 313, he issued the Edict of Milan, which not only legalized Christianity, but eventually propelled it to become the favored, state-sponsored religion of the Roman Empire.
Which, on the surface sounds like a massive victory, right? Like the persecution finally stops.
It definitely seems like a victory, but the author argues it was a Trojan horse.
A Trojan horse? Why?
Because before Constantine, for roughly 300 years, the text notes that Christians met almost exclusively in private homes.
Just homes?
Yeah. The author cites Romans 16, Philemon 1, and several other passages to prove this. They gathered in living rooms, they ate meals together, broke bread, and functioned as this horizontal familial network.
But Emperor Constantine didn't really like the living room vibe, did he?
Not at all. I mean, Constantine was an emperor. He understood power, optics, and imperial grandeur. Yeah. He couldn't have the official state religion meeting quietly in the slums or in modest courtyard homes. He wanted grand imperial architecture to legitimize the religion.
So what did he do?
He championed the construction of massive public buildings, and the architectural model he chose was the Roman basilica.
And what exactly was a basilica in the Roman world? Because today, we associate that word with massive cathedrals and churches, but that wasn't its original function.
Exactly. Originally, basilicas were Roman courtrooms and centers of imperial administration.
Pilgrims.
Yes, they were designed for civic business, not intimate fellowship. And the architecture of a basilica is very specific and very intentional.
Break it down for us.
It features this massive rectangular hall. And at the very front of the hall, there's a raised platform, often set in an apse. On this platform was a seat called a cathedra.
The cathedra, that's where we get the English word cathedral, right?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. The cathedra was the literal seat of authority. It was where the imperial judge, the magistrate, or the governor would sit to hand down rulings, pass judgments, or give speeches to the masses gathered in the hall below.
I really want to camp out on this for a second because the psychological implications of architecture are just fascinating.
Oh, they dictate everything.
They really do. If you take a group of people who are used to sitting in a circle around a dining room table, passing food, looking each other in the eye, having a two-way dialogue, and you move them into a cavernous stone courtroom with perfect acoustics designed for a single voice to project, everything changes.
Everything.
You cannot have an Acts chapter 2 family meal in a room designed for a judge to glare down at you. The physical space dictates the human behavior.
That is the core argument of this entire section. The author asserts that moving out of living rooms and into courtrooms forced the participatory, intimate family meal to be replaced by formal, rigid Roman theater.
It's just wild.
You literally couldn't do koinonia in a basilica. Everyone had to face forward and be quiet.
And this architectural shift birthed a massive sociological shift within the church, too, right?
Yeah.
The text refers to it as the clergy-laity split.
Yes. And to understand this split, we have to look at another piece of Roman culture the church absorbed, which is the orator.
Unpack that for us. Who are the orators?
In ancient Greco-Roman culture, public speaking was an elite profession. Orators were highly trained, highly educated professionals who gave these grand rhetorical speeches. They were basically the celebrities of their day.
Okay, got it.
When an orator spoke in a basilica or a public forum, the audience's only job was to stand in silence, listen to the brilliance of the monologue, and perhaps applaud at the end.
Right.
The text argues that the church, newly housed in these basilicas, simply adopted this pagan Roman practice. They elevated a single professionally trained speaker, who eventually became known as the priest or pastor, and turned the rest of the believers into a passive audience.
And the linguistic breakdown the author provides here is vital to the argument. The text contrasts two Greek words, kleros and laos.
Right. Let's look at kleros first. It means an inheritance or a designated portion. This is where we get the English word clergy.
And laos.
Laos simply means the common people, which is where we get the word laity. The author argues that this artificial division between the elite professional clergy and the amateur spectator laity is explicitly condemned by the original blueprint.
Right. The text brings up 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9 to counter this Roman structure.
Yeah.
That verse describes the entire body of believers as a royal priesthood.
The whole body.
Exactly. The author's argument is that in the New Testament blueprint, there is no such thing as a holy man on a stage performing for an unholy crowd in the pews. Every single believer is supposed to be a functioning priest.
The author goes even further with this, offering a devastating critique of this adopted Roman model.
What's the critique?
The text warns that the orator and audience structure actually paralyzes the body of Christ. It cites 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 19 and 20, which says, "Do not quench the spirit." The argument is that when a structure forces 99% of the believers to sit in absolute silence so that 1% can perform, it turns a living, breathing body into a static monologue.
Think about that biologically for a second. If the body of Christ is an actual organism, the modern structure is like a human body where only the mouth is allowed to move.
That's a great way to put it.
The hands, the feet, the immune system, they are all told to sit still, be quiet, and just watch the mouth do its thing for an hour. It's functional paralysis.
It is institutional paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
And if the basilica model broke the body, we need to look at what the original unparalyzed body looked like in action.
Right. Let's pivot back to the blueprint.
If it wasn't a 60-minute sermon in a Roman courtroom, where did they actually meet and what practically happened during a gathering?
The text dedicates a massive section to this, which we can call the anatomy of a biblical gathering.
Yes.
And as we mentioned, for the first 3 centuries, the blueprint shows them meeting almost exclusively in the private homes of believers.
The source material provides a rapid-fire list of scriptural evidence for this, and honestly, it's pretty overwhelming when you see it all aggregated.
Walk us through it.
Well, you have the original believers in the upper room in Acts 1. You have the church gathering at Mary's house in Acts 12. In Romans 16, Paul greets the church that meets in the house of Aquila and Priscilla.
Right.
There's the church in the house of Nympha, mentioned in Colossians 4, the church in the house of Philemon, and the believers gathering at the house of Lydia in Acts 16.
It's literally everywhere.
It is. The author stresses that meeting in homes wasn't a temporary stopgap just because they were too poor to build temples. It was the intended theological design.
Let's talk about the physical layout of a first-century Roman home because it really matters.
Yeah.
Whether it was a wealthy patron's domus with a central courtyard or a crowded apartment, the space was intimate.
Very intimate.
It forced face-to-face interaction. The author contrasts the modern 60-minute service with these ancient house gatherings, starting with the focal point of the meeting, the meal.
The text points out a massive divergence here. Today, communion is often reduced to a tiny, dry wafer and a thimble of juice, taken individually in solemn silence.
Yeah, that's what we're used to.
But the author argues that was never the original practice.
No, the original practice was a full dinner party.
Exactly. It was called the agape feast, or the love feast.
Agape meaning love.
Right, and this is explicitly referenced in 1 Corinthians 11 and Jude 1, verse 12. It was a substantial covenant meal eaten together around a table. The author actually points out a really fascinating detail in 1 Corinthians 11.
Oh, the part where Paul is reprimanding people?
Yes. Paul is actually reprimanding people because they are getting too full, and some are even getting drunk at communion.
Which proves the point perfectly. You cannot get full, let alone drunk, on a 2-millimeter mass-produced wafer.
Exactly.
It was a real caloric meal that formed the social and spiritual center of their gathering. The bread and the wine were integrated into an actual dinner where people looked each other in the eye.
And that intimacy extended to how information was communicated, too.
Right, because if there wasn't a pulpit and there wasn't a professional orator delivering a monologue, how did teaching happen?
The text highlights a very specific Greek word used in Acts 20, when Paul is described as speaking to the church late into the night. The word is dialegomai.
Which sounds exactly like the English word dialogue.
Because it is the root of that word. The author emphasizes that dialegomai means a two-way discussion.
So it wasn't a speech.
Not at all. It involves questions, answers, debate, and interactive teaching. It wasn't a script being read at an audience. It was a conversation happening with a family.
The text pairs this concept with 1 Corinthians 14, verse 26, which honestly might be the most crucial verse for understanding this blueprint.
It really is the anchor.
Paul writes, "What then shall we say, brothers and sisters? When you come together, each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation."
I want to emphasize those three words you just said. Each of you.
Each of you.
Not just the designated professional, not just the trained clergy. The expectation was radical, decentralized participation. Every single person in the room was expected to come prepared to contribute something to the spiritual nourishment of the group.
Okay, I want to push back on this, or at least play devil's advocate for the listener.
Sure.
If you have 30 or 40 people in a living room, and the rule is everyone gets to share whatever is on their mind, that sounds like a recipe for absolute chaos.
It sounds terrifying.
It really does. How do you prevent it from turning into a chaotic free-for-all where people are just talking over each other?
It's a great question. And the text addresses it by pointing to the mechanisms of mutual submission that were actually built into the blueprint.
How did that work?
It references verses 29 through 31 of that exact same chapter, 1 Corinthians 14. Paul gives a specific rule for order. He says that if a revelation comes to someone who is sitting down, the person who's currently speaking is actually supposed to stop talking and yield the floor.
Just stop talking.
Yeah, yield the floor immediately.
Think about the humility required for that. Imagine trying to do that in a modern setting. You're sitting in row 14 of a mega building. The pastor is 20 minutes into a highly polished, timed sermon, and you stand up and say, "Excuse me, I believe I have a revelation to share."
Oh, you would be swiftly escorted out by the security team.
Instantly. But in this ancient blueprint, being interrupted by a fellow believer was codified as standard operating procedure.
It requires a profound lack of ego from the leadership.
Right.
And because it was an interactive environment in a living room, the text argues that immediate, practical care was actually possible. You couldn't hide your struggles in the back row.
You were face to face.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If someone had a pressing economic need, like we discussed in Acts 4, or if they were physically sick, like the elders praying over the sick in James 5, it wasn't outsourced to a committee.
Right, they handled it.
It was addressed collectively, on the spot, by the family.
The author provides a really brilliant summary table in the text that contrasts these two models. I want to run through it for you listening because it's a great mental checkpoint to crystallize everything we've talked about so far.
It really clarifies the stark differences. Let's do it.
Okay, under the category of location, the modern standard is a commercial or specialized religious building.
Yeah.
But the biblical standard was private homes and living rooms. Under structure, the modern approach is a spectator audience facing a stage. The biblical approach was a spiritual family gathered around a table.
And then for leadership, the modern model relies heavily on a one-man show or a professional speaker.
Right.
But the biblical model relied on a plurality of elders whose sole job was equipping everyone else to function. Under communication, the modern standard is a monologue requiring absolute silence from the crowd, whereas the biblical standard was dialogomai interactive horizontal dialogue.
For the meal, we have a symbolized individual wafer today versus a full communal agape feast in the original design. And finally, the primary goal. The modern goal is getting people to attend a 60-minute service. The biblical goal was living as a 24/7 covenant family, practicing koinonia.
When you lay it out like that, the level of extreme decentralization is thrilling.
It is.
But it also begs a massive practical question.
Yes. The obvious pushback that any modern leader reading this would have. If there is no single pastor running the show, if everyone is just talking and sharing around a dinner table, what on earth is leadership supposed to do?
Right.
Does leadership even exist in this decentralized blueprint, or is it just spiritual anarchy?
The author is very clear that leadership absolutely exists. It is vital.
Oh.
But it functions completely differently than the corporate hierarchical models we are used to today.
Okay, so how does it function?
Well, the final major section of the text is a complete decoding of biblical leadership, focusing heavily on what is known as the fivefold ministry. This is outlined by Paul in Ephesians 4, verses 11 and 12.
Okay, let's unpack this fivefold ministry. The 5 roles listed are apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers.
Right.
And the text argues forcefully that these are not rungs on a corporate ladder. They aren't VIP titles for the elite to put on their business cards.
No, not at all. And the text offers a linguistic masterclass here on the Greek word used in Ephesians 4 to describe the actual purpose of these leaders.
What's the word?
The verse says that Christ gave these 5 specific gifts to equip his people for works of service. The Greek word translated as equip is katartismos.
Katartismos. The author breaks down 3 historical usages for this specific word in the ancient world, and honestly, I found this to be the most clarifying part of the entire book.
It's so illuminating.
Walk us through them.
The first historical usage of katartisino is medical.
Okay, medical.
In ancient Greek medicine, the word meant to set a broken bone or dislocated joint back into proper alignment so the body can heal and function properly.
Which involves applying pressure.
Yeah.
It involves some pain to get things back into alignment so the organism isn't crippled.
Exactly. The second usage is nautical. Katartismos meant to mend a torn fishing net. In fact, this exact word is used in Matthew chapter 4 when Jesus finds James and John sitting in their boat mending their nets.
Oh, wow.
A net with a massive hole in it cannot catch fish. It has to be rewoven and repaired.
And the third usage?
The third is military. Katartismos meant to outfit or provision a soldier with armor, weapons, and supplies, so they are prepared to go into battle. You don't send naked, untrained recruits to the front lines. You equip them.
Okay, so let's synthesize that. If I'm understanding the author's argument correctly, these 5 roles, apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, are not the star actors on a stage performing for a passive audience. They are the backstage crew, they are the medical staff resetting the bones of the body, they are the net menders fixing the holes in the community, they are the military drill instructors and quartermasters.
That's exactly it.
They do not play the game for you. Their entire job is to outfit you to play the game.
That is exactly the paradigm shift the author is pushing. Their job is not to perform ministry while you watch. Their job is to mend, align, and deploy you into ministry. And the text then takes this katartismos equipping function and redefines each of the 5 specific roles based on their original Greek roots, stripping away all the modern religious baggage.
Let's go through them one by one because this changes everything.
Let's do it.
First up, apostles. The Greek word is apostolos.
In ancient Rome, an apostolos was not a religious title. It was an official envoy, an admiral, or a general sent out by the emperor to a newly conquered territory.
Okay.
Their job was to establish the culture, the architecture, and the laws of Rome in that new place. The text argues that biblical apostles are not supposed to be building personal megachurch empires.
Right.
They are master builders tasked with establishing kingdom culture, laying foundational doctrine, and equipping the saints to pioneer new spiritual territory.
Next, prophets. Prophets. Today, a lot of people view prophets as, spiritual psychics you go to for a personal word about your future.
The author rejects that entirely. The Greek root means to speak forth the mind and counsel of God. And in the context of katartismos, their job isn't to be the exclusive mouthpiece of God for the congregation.
So what is their job?
Their job is to equip all the saints to hear God's voice for themselves. The text references John 10, where Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice." A true prophet trains the flock to recognize that voice, so they aren't dependent on the prophet.
Then we have evangelists, euangelists. We usually think of a charismatic guy in a stadium doing all the preaching and all the soul winning while the church just watches from the bleachers.
But if their job is katartismos, then the evangelist's primary role is not just to win souls. It is to train, inspire, and fire up every single believer in the house church to be an effective soul winner in their own daily lives.
At their jobs, in their neighborhoods.
Exactly. They impart the grace for evangelism to the whole body.
Which brings us to pastors. Poimen. This is a massive one because pastor has just become the default catch-all title for the guy in charge of modern religion.
And the text points out that poimen literally translates to shepherd. The author argues that in the biblical blueprint, pastor is a function, not a title.
A function.
Yes, a shepherd protects the flock from wolves, cares for the wounded, and guides them to pasture. But crucially, in the equipping model, a true pastor trains the believers how to shepherd, counsel, and care for one another in real community. They reproduce shepherds.
And finally, teachers. Didaskalos.
A true teacher doesn't just dump complex theological jargon on an audience to sound smart. They equip others to study and handle the Word of God for themselves.
I see.
The text cites 2 Timothy 2, verse 2, where Paul tells Timothy to take what he has learned and entrust it to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. It's a chain of multiplication.
This raises the ultimate question. What happens when this actually works?
That's the goal.
When you have a group of people functioning in katartismos, equipping rather than performing, and operating in living rooms rather than courtrooms.
The author answers that by pointing to the very next verses in the blueprint, Ephesians 4, verses 13 through 16. It says, the direct result of this equipping is that the body reaches maturity.
Maturity.
People are no longer infants tossed back and forth by slick cultural trends or false doctrines because they actually know the material and can hear God for themselves. The text says the body builds itself up in love as each part does its work.
As each part does its work, not as one guy does all the work.
Exactly.
The text contrasts that beautiful functioning organism with the tragedy of the one-man system. If one professional tries to act as the apostle, prophet, evangelist, pastor, and teacher all at once for hundreds of people, you end up with two disastrous results.
Total. Crushing burnout for the leader.
Yep, and total infantile stagnation for the 95% sitting in the pews.
The author summarizes this entire structural argument with a perfect analogy. God's design is a gym, not a theater.
A gym, not a theater. Let that sink in.
In a theater, you buy a ticket, you sit in a comfortable seat, and you watch professionals perform. If the show is good, you applaud and come back next week.
Right.
But in a gym, you are there to sweat, to train, to build muscle, and to be equipped by a coach. Success in a theater is measured by how many people are in the seats watching.
But success in a gym?
Success in a gym is measured by how strong and capable the people become. The blueprint measures success by how many mature, equipped believers are deployed into the world, functioning as ambassadors.
We have covered a truly massive amount of ground today, unpacking the Ekklesia blueprint. We've gone from the linguistic roots of secular Greek city councils through the radical poverty-eradicating economics of ancient house churches.
That's a lot to take in.
It is. We've traced the architectural hijack from intimate dining tables to imperial Roman courtrooms, and we've decoded the medical and military metaphors of equipping leadership. It is a staggering, comprehensive paradigm shift.
It really is. And for you, the learner, regardless of where you land on personal theology or religion, This text serves as an absolute masterclass in institutional drift.
A masterclass.
It shows exactly how human structures can subtly, over centuries, completely overwrite their own founding blueprints. It's a brilliant case study in how language gets domesticated to lose its edge, and how physical architecture can silently dictate and alter human behavior without anyone even noticing.
And that is exactly where I want to leave you, our listener, today. We started this deep dive talking about a blueprint for a cozy house turning into a cold commercial warehouse.
Right.
The text makes a compelling historical argument that the architecture of a Roman courtroom fundamentally changed the behavior of early Christians, turning active, governing participants into passive, silent spectators.
The architecture changed the people.
Exactly. So I want you to look around your own life today. Take inventory of your workplace, your community organizations, and your daily routines. What physical structures or unquestioned inherited systems are secretly dictating your behavior right now?
It's a great question.
Are there processes at your job that force you to be a spectator when you should be a participant? What invisible architecture is currently squeezing you into a mold you didn't even realize you were in?
Identifying the molds is the only way you can ever break out of it.
It's the question you have to ask if you ever want to get back to the original design. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep checking the blueprint.